In the light, this is what Dalek says, in the light of the national unwillingness to face up fully to the international dangers facing the country, it is difficult to fault Roosevelt for building a consensus by devious means. Yet for all the need to mislead the country in its own interest, Roosevelt's deviousness also injured the national well-being in the long run. It created a precedent for manipulation of public opinion, which would be repeated by later presidents in less justifiable circumstances. He means Lyndon Johnson in Vietnam, because the professor was against that particular war. But whatever your view of our involvement in World War II, what does it say that an American president lied the country into war for our own good? Is this Washington and Jefferson or Niccolo Machiavelli? Sometimes Roosevelt's lies were laughably transparent. Thus, to quote Professor Dalek, Roosevelt told a press conference on September 30th, 1941, that Article 124 of the new Russian Constitution guaranteed freedom of conscience. This is what Roosevelt said: freedom equally to use propaganda against religion. Can you imagine the communists allowed propaganda against religion? Roosevelt said, which is essentially what is the rule in this country, although we don't put it quite that way. As Dalek comments, Roosevelt knew full well that there was no freedom of religion in the Soviet Union. No, there wasn't. Not after the communists had murdered tens of thousands of priests, bishops, and millions of Christian laity. Now, and this is the way history is concocted, imagine for a moment that Robert Taft or Herbert Hoover or some other conservative leader had said in 1941 that the Jews enjoyed freedom of religion in Nazi Germany. Do you think that we might have heard about such a ridiculous and shameful statement? In fact, isn't it likely that it would have been drummed into our heads from the time we entered grade school? Yet here's Roosevelt making a similar defense of Stalin's Russia, and his outrageous lie has disappeared down the memory hole. This is the Franklin Roosevelt who amiably referred to Stalin as Uncle Joe, and who is praised to the skies by today's conservative leaders, by the Wall Street Journal, by Newt Gingrich, who calls Roosevelt the greatest president of the 20th century, and many of the others. With World War II, the rule was set. It is the job of the President of the United States to identify foreign monsters that the people are too short-sighted to recognize. And it is his right and duty to deceive and manipulate the people into waging war against them. This is the policy that was carried out by Roosevelt's successor, Harry Truman. Starting with the Truman Doctrine, the public was misled again and again about the mortal dangers facing America. At the time, Senator Vandenberg, who was in favor of it, advised Truman that if he wanted to get Congress to endorse his Truman Doctrine, the recipe for endless foreign involvement, he would have to scare hell out of the American people. That is what Truman did, and that is what successive administrations have kept on doing. Robert Higgs of the Independent Review has written, and his works are indispensable for an understanding of this whole problem, has written that for over a half-century we have had a state of continuous national emergency and sustained military readiness without precedent in American history. What is politely called information management, the lies and half-truths spread by thousands of hired propagandists, professional propagandists, at the Pentagon and other agencies in Washington, this has served to keep up the anxiety level. The lie by Condoleezza Rice, brilliant woman, about the imminence of a mushroom cloud rising above American cities, a pretext for the invasion of Iraq, is just one of thousands over the years. Another result of the Second World War is perhaps more dismal. The American people themselves have become inured to the wholesale massacre of enemy civilians by the U.S. military. The killing of hundreds of thousands of civilians through the terror bombing of German and Japanese cities was accepted and even applauded. Then it was followed in the Korean War, when General Curtis LeMay admitted, or really boasted, of the killing of around 1 million Korean civilians, North and South, by the U.S. Air Force. How many Vietnamese civilians were killed by the American bombing or otherwise massacred will never be known. It is probably on the order of 1.5 million. If you've never seen it before, you might go to Washington just to look at the Vietnam Memorial. Don't bother with that World War II memorial. Unbelievably garish. Mussolini would have liked it a lot. But if you look at the Vietnam Memorial, it contains the names only of Americans who were killed, about 58,000. It's very moving and may bring tears to your eyes. But if it had included Vietnamese killed, it would have to have been 75 times bigger. And so it goes. In Serbia under Clinton, today in Iraq, civilians are killed, families wiped, Afghanistan too, families wiped out, and as always, the only concern of most Americans is with American casualties. The few who are concerned about the death inflicted on foreign innocents are derided as traitors, wimps, or some other mindless epithet, girly boys. There is a book by Chris Hedges, a reporter who has witnessed many recent battles in different parts of the world. It's called War as a Force That Gives Us Meaning. It's about the emotional and psychological benefits that people experience during war. They experience a sense of community and solidarity with their fellow citizens. They're imbued with the feeling of being part of something immeasurably great and grand. Part of human nature, I suppose. Another major result of our wars is that large parts of the U.S. Constitution have become dead letters. The most obvious is the war-making power. It is pretty well known that the Constitution explicitly vests the power to declare war in the Congress. Article 1, Section 8 enumerates the various powers of Congress, and Clause 11 reads, "The Congress shall have power to declare war." There's a reason for this. Madison warned that the executive branch of government is inclined to war. This is what he said. War is in fact, Madison is often called the father of the Constitution. War is in fact the true nurse of executive aggrandizement. The strongest passions and the most dangerous weaknesses of the human breast, ambition, avarice, vanity, the honorable or venal love of fame, are all in a conspiracy against the desire and duty of peace. Nothing is clearer than that the framers intended that Congress and not the president should possess the war-making power. One of the major framers, John Wilson of Pennsylvania, argued for adoption of the ratifying convention of the state on that basis. The system will not hurry us into war. Madison himself said the Constitution presupposes what the history of all governments demonstrates, that the executive is the branch of power most interested in war and most prone to it. How far we've come from that understanding to what's accepted today. It was accordingly in the Constitution with studied care that this power was vested in the legislature.